He made me kneel and apologize in front of his family. But trust me, my comeback was biblical. Stick with me while I share my story, and if it touches you, don't forget to support our channel by hitting that subscribe button, dropping a like, and sharing it with the people you care about. My name is Emily Parker. I'm in my early 30s, and for years I believed I had found the man I would grow old with. His name is Daniel Miller. To everyone else, Daniel looked like the perfect partner. He was successful, well-spoken, always smiling when we were around other people. But behind that polished image was someone different, someone I would come to know far too well. Daniel's family never made things easy for him. His mother, Patricia, had a way of looking at me that felt like judgment wrapped in polite words. His father rarely spoke, but his silence often felt like agreement with every critical thing Patricia hinted at. I tried my best to win them over. I cooked for them, remembered birthdays, dressed the way Daniel liked when we went to family events. Nothing was ever enough. Still, I told myself this was the man I loved, and love meant compromise. One evening, Daniel invited me to his parents' home for dinner. It wasn't unusual. We often had Sunday dinners there, but the tension in the air that night felt different. I could sense Patricia's cold smile the moment we walked in. His brother and his wife were there too, making the table feel full, all eyes ready to notice any misstep I made. Dinner started quietly. Plates passed, small talk made. I answered politely when spoken to, careful not to say the wrong thing. But then something small happened, something so trivial it almost sounds ridiculous now. Patricia made a comment about a dish on the table, asking if I had ever cooked anything similar. I said I hadn't but would love to try. Daniel, instead of supporting me, made a sharp remark about how I never bothered learning the right recipe. The table chuckled lightly, but it cut into me. When I tried to defend myself, saying I did cook and often, Daniel's face hardened. His voice turned cold, loud enough for everyone to hear. He said I was being disrespectful, that I needed to apologize to his mother for contradicting. I froze, heat rushing to my face. I opened my mouth to explain, but he cut me off again. Then, in a tone that left no room for refusal, he told me to kneel and apologize. The room went silent. My heart pounded in my chest. I looked around the table, waiting for someone, anyone, to step in. No one did. His father stared down at his plate. Patricia sat tall, her lips pressed in satisfaction. Even his brother stayed quiet. Every part of me screamed against it, but my body moved before my pride could stop me. I lowered myself, knees pressing against the polished floor. My voice shook as I said the words Daniel demanded, apologizing for something I hadn't even done. The shame burned through me while his family watched. Daniel looked proud of himself. His mother nodded approvingly. I felt smaller than I ever had in my life. But as I stayed there, my knees aching, something inside me shifted. I knew I couldn't forget this moment. I knew I would never forgive it either. So I swallowed the humiliation, stood when he allowed me, and sat quietly through the rest of dinner. On the outside, I looked broken. On the inside, I was already planning the day I would take back my power. After that dinner, I started seeing Daniel different. It was like the curtain had been pulled back, and I couldn't unsee what was there. His behavior, which I once brushed off as stress or personality quirks, began to feel like a pattern I had ignored for too long. I remembered how often he dismissed me when we were with friends. If I offered an opinion on something, he'd talk over me like my words didn't matter. Sometimes he'd laugh at me in front of others, pretending it was a joke, but his tone always stung. When I told him in private that it bothered me, he'd roll his eyes and say I was too sensitive, that I should learn how to take a joke. At first, I tried to believe him. Maybe I was too sensitive. Maybe I should just laugh along. But then the jokes became sharper. He liked to remind me that my job as a teacher wasn't as valuable as his work in business. He'd say things like, "You play with kids while I actually earn the money that keeps us comfortable." He said it with a smile, but the words stayed with me long after. I began noticing how he measured everything in terms of importance, and I never seemed to rank high in his world. His family wasn't much better. Patricia, his mother, always had something to say about me. If I wore a dress, she'd point out that another color might have been more flattering. If I brought a dish to a dinner, she'd comment on how Daniel's ex once made something so delicious, the family still talks about it. Every sentence felt like a little cut. The worst part was that Daniel never defended me. He would either stay quiet or, worse, agree with her. I didn't have anyone I could talk to about it, so I turned to a notebook. At night, after Daniel fell asleep, I would write down the things that happened during the day. Every comment, every look, every time I felt small. I didn't know why I was doing it at first, but writing it down helped me see the pattern. I began to realize these moments weren't isolated, they were constant. The moment that really stayed with me happened one afternoon at his parents' house. I had stepped out into the hallway to grab something from my bag when I heard Daniel's voice in the next room. He was talking to his brother, Mark. His tone was casual, almost bragging. He said, "Emily should be lucky I chose her. Honestly, I could have done better." The words froze me in place. My stomach dropped, and my hands started shaking. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. This was the man I loved, the man I had defended so many times, telling his own brother that I was beneath him. I stayed quiet, not wanting them to know I had overheard, but inside I felt something break. That sentence played in my head over and over again. She should be lucky I chose her. It was clear now. To him, I wasn't a partner. I was a possession. And that realization was the beginning of the end, even if I wasn't ready to admit it out loud just yet. The night Daniel proposed should have been one of the happiest of my life. Instead, it felt like another performance for his family. He didn't plan anything private or thoughtful, no moment that belonged only to us. He waited until everyone was gathered in his parents' living room after dinner, and then he stood up with a big smile and called everyone's attention. Before I could even process what was happening, he pulled out a ring and started talking about how lucky he was to have found someone who fit into the Miller family so well. He made it sound more like a speech about his family's approval than about our relationship. Then he looked at me, holding out the ring, and asked if I would marry him. The room erupted in clapping and cheers before I could even answer. I felt every eye on me, waiting. My heart was racing, and even though something inside me hesitated, I nodded and said yes. Daniel slid the ring onto my finger, grinning at the applause around us. It felt like I had agreed to marry him and his entire family in that moment. At first, I tried to push away the uneasy feeling. I told myself maybe it didn't matter how it happened, as long as we were engaged. But that uneasiness only grew. A few weeks later, I met with an old friend for coffee, someone who had known Daniel years before I did. When I mentioned the engagement, her face shifted. She hesitated, then asked me if I knew that Daniel had been engaged before. My stomach dropped. I shook my head, saying I had never heard anything about it. She explained that several years earlier, Daniel had been set to marry another woman, a girl named Lisa. But he ended it suddenly, just months before the wedding. My friend didn't know all the details, only that it had ended badly. The next time I was alone, I searched through some old photos Daniel had left on his computer, and sure enough, I found them. Pictures of him with Lisa, smiling, her wearing a ring. My chest tightened. He had never told me. Not once. When I asked him about it later, he brushed it off. He said it wasn't important, that it didn't matter anymore. He acted annoyed, like I was digging into something I had no right to know. His reaction only made me more suspicious. Not long after, I got the rest of the story from another mutual acquaintance. The engagement hadn't just ended, it had ended in humiliation. Daniel had forced Lisa to apologize publicly for something trivial, right before he broke it off. He had embarrassed her in front of people she loved, the same way he had done to me. That night, when I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, everything became clearer. I wasn't the first woman he had treated this way, and if I stayed, I wouldn't be the last. He had a pattern, and I was trapped in it. But instead of running, something inside me hardened. Walking away right then would only give him another story to tell, another woman he could call weak or unworthy. No, if Daniel thought he was in control, he was wrong. I decided to stay quiet, play along, and wait. Because if there was one thing I knew, it was that he would slip again, and when he did, I'd be ready. After learning about Daniel's past engagement, I stopped looking at him the same way. Outwardly, I kept up the act of a loving fiancé, but inside I was watching everything. Every word he said, every move he made, every look his family gave me, I studied it all. If I was going to stay, I needed to understand exactly what I was dealing with. It didn't take long to see the truth about Patricia, his mother. To outsiders, she acted like the picture of grace, always smiling, always polite. But behind that smile, I saw the sharp edges. Her biggest concern wasn't kindness or fairness. It was appearances. The Miller family's image meant everything to her. She cared about what neighbors thought, what church members whispered, and how Daniel looked as the successful son. If anyone threatened that polished picture, Patricia made sure they were pushed out. Once I understood that, I realized I had a tool I could use. If appearances mattered most, then one day the truth, when revealed in the right setting, would cut deeper than anything else. But I couldn't rush. I had to make her believe I was compliant, that I would never dare to go against the family. That's when Rachel entered the picture. She was Daniel's cousin, younger than us by a few years. She wasn't around often, but when she was, I noticed something in her eyes. She didn't laugh at his cruel jokes. She didn't join in when Patricia picked at me. She watched quietly, and sometimes, when Daniel wasn't looking, she gave me small, knowing looks. One afternoon, after a family barbecue, Rachel caught me while I was cleaning up in the kitchen. She leaned close and said softly, "You don't deserve the way he talks to you." For a moment I just stood there frozen. No one in that family had ever spoken those words to me. I almost cried right then, but I held it in. I simply nodded, and that was enough. From that moment, I knew I had at least one person who saw the truth. I didn't confide everything to her, not yet. I was cautious. But I began to speak with her more at family events, asking about her life, listening, slowly building trust. She became my quiet ally, though she might not have realized the full extent of what I was planning. With Daniel, I became an actress. I laughed at his jokes. I agreed with his opinions. I apologized quickly when he snapped at me. I let him believe I was bending further into his control. What he didn't know was that every word, every insult, every command was being stored away in my mind. I knew I couldn't take him head on. He was too proud, too certain of his power. But pride makes people sloppy. So I waited. I played the part he wanted, letting him think he was winning. All the while, my resolve grew stronger. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was preparing. At first, I noticed small things that didn't add up. Unexplained charges on our joint card, Daniel coming home late with a careless excuse, and the fact that he started guarding his phone like it was private treasure. I tried to ignore it, hoping I was wrong, but one day I found a message that stopped me cold. It wasn't meant for me, but the phrasing left no doubt. It was flirtatious, intimate, the kind of message people only send when they're hiding something serious. I didn't react. Instead, I began to collect proof quietly and carefully. I took photos of the messages on his phone, screenshots with dates and times showing, and I saved them to a hidden folder on my laptop. I didn't confront him because I knew the moment I did, he'd destroy the trail. So I backed everything up, emailed copies to an account only I could access, and printed receipts that matched hotel charges I found in our bills. I kept a note of the names, the places, and the times. It turned out the messages were with a coworker named Megan. I learned she was married, which made everything feel messier and more dangerous. I found voice messages too, one where the tone was hushed, the words soft and private. The evidence piled up in my hands like cold stones. Each piece confirmed what I feared. Daniel had been betraying me for months. When I first saw it all, I felt numb. Then the numbness turned to a tight, aching grief. The man I thought I trusted had been leading a double life. I replayed simple memories in my head, trying to find signs I'd missed, conversations that suddenly looked different. It hurt in ways I can't describe, like someone had reached into my chest and rearranged my heart. After that wave of sorrow, anger came in a clear, hot rush. Daniel's demeanor shifted too. He grew bolder, more careless. Where he had once hidden his edge behind charm, he now wore arrogance openly, as if he believed I would never do anything about it. He criticized me more, took petty digs at my job, and acted like I was beneath his notice. Maybe he thought his secret made him untouchable. Maybe he believed I was too broken to respond. That belief lit a cold fire inside me. I stopped letting my feelings control me and started using my head. All those nights of quiet observation paid off. I organized the evidence, labeled every file, and wrote notes that tied each piece together: who, when, where, and how. I thought about the impact his behavior would have on the people around him if they knew the truth. I thought about how many times I had swallowed humiliations and smiled through them. I decided I wouldn't be silent, not out of spite only, but because truth has weight. I wanted him to feel the consequence of the choices he'd made. I wanted him to understand that betrayal isn't private when it hurts other people. Preparing the evidence felt like taking the first steps away from being a victim and toward something sharper, a plan that would hold him accountable. The hurt and shock never completely left me, but they changed shape. They became purpose. I would not let this end with quiet suffering. I would meet it with truth, and I would make sure he could no longer hide behind charm or excuses. I didn't want to carry the weight of the truth alone anymore. Rachel was the only person in Daniel's family who had ever shown me kindness, so one afternoon I asked her to meet me for coffee. She arrived with her usual easy smile, but when she saw the look on my face, she knew something was wrong. I hesitated, then slid my phone across the table. On the screen were the messages, the receipts, the voicemail. I let her scroll, watching her expression change from confusion to disbelief, then finally to anger. She set the phone down and shook her head. "I knew he wasn't good to you," she whispered. "But this? Emily, this is worse than I thought." Hearing her say that broke something inside me, but it also steadied me. For the first time, someone else could see exactly what I had been living with. I told her everything: the insults, the constant control, the humiliations, and now the affair. Rachel didn't try to excuse him. She didn't tell me to keep it quiet or to forgive. She leaned forward, her voice low but sharp. "You can't let him keep doing this to you. He needs to be exposed." The word exposed stayed with me. It was the perfect counter to what Daniel had done to me. He had stripped me of my dignity in front of his family, making me kneel on the floor like I was beneath them all. If I was going to fight back, it had to be in front of those same people. Not in private. Not quietly. He had chosen the stage, and I would use it against him. Rachel and I spent hours talking about how it could happen. She knew how much his mother cared about appearances, and we both realized that the worst blow Daniel could take would be in front of Patricia, at a moment when the family gathered to celebrate her. Patricia's birthday was coming up soon. Everyone would be there: parents, siblings, cousins, family, friends. It was the perfect stage. I decided I wouldn't go into it with anger alone. I would go in with proof, organized and undeniable. The texts, the receipts, the voicemail, all of it, ready to be shown and heard by anyone who doubted me. I wanted to strip away the mask he wore so carefully and force his family to see who he really was. Rachel promised she would stand by me when the time came. Her support gave me courage I hadn't felt in months. For once, I wasn't walking into that house alone. From that day forward, every move I made was careful. I smiled at Daniel, laughed at his empty jokes, and let him believe nothing had changed. He thought he had me under control. What he didn't know was that I was counting down the days, waiting for Patricia's birthday dinner. That night would not be like the others. It wouldn't end with me silent and humiliated. It would end with Daniel stripped of his lies, kneeling in the truth he could no longer escape. In the weeks leading up to Patricia's birthday dinner, I played the role of the perfect fiancé. I smiled at Daniel's side, asked about his day, and even cooked his favorite meals. I let him think I had accepted my place, that I was still grateful for the ring on my finger. He carried himself with smug confidence, as if my loyalty was sealed. It was exactly what I needed. The more convinced he was, the harder the fall would be. Behind the scenes, I set the other piece of my plan in motion. I found a way to reach Megan's husband. It wasn't hard. His name was on some of the hotel receipts I had copied. I mailed him a small packet with everything he needed to see: printed texts, receipts, and a note in plain words explaining who his wife had been meeting. I didn't sign my name, but I didn't need to. The proof spoke for itself. I knew once he saw it, he wouldn't stay silent. At night, I sat at my desk rehearsing what I would say. I wrote down the words, then read them aloud until they were steady and sharp. No stumbles, no hesitation. I had been forced to kneel once. This time, I would stand tall and deliver the truth without fear. It wasn't just about revenge. It was about finally being heard, about making sure every person at that table knew who Daniel really was. The night of the dinner finally came. Patricia's house was full of chatter and the clinking of glasses. The table was decorated with flowers, and the smell of roasted meat filled the air. Relatives crowded the dining room, laughing, hugging, catching up. It looked like a picture-perfect family celebration, and that was the point. Appearances were everything to the Millers. Daniel walked around the room like a king. He poured wine, pulled out chairs, and charmed his cousins with stories about work and success. When he introduced me to a new relative, he placed his arm around me possessively, his smile wide. To them, we looked like the ideal couple, the successful man and his supportive fiancé. Only I knew the truth under that mask. I sat quietly, waiting, my hands folded in my lap. Every word he spoke only fueled my resolve. He bragged about his career, joked about how I kept him grounded, and played the part of a devoted son. His family laughed, proud of the man they thought he was. But I wasn't nervous. My speech was memorized, my evidence ready, and my timing chosen. The moment would come when he least expected it, when his arrogance was at its highest. That was when I would cut him down with the truth. As the plates were set and the candles flickered, I glanced around the table, calm and steady. Tonight wasn't just a birthday dinner. Tonight was the night Daniel's mask would shatter in front of every single person who had once believed in it. Dinner began the way it always did in that house. Patricia smiling like a queen at the head of the table, Daniel telling stories that made him look larger than life. The food was passed around, glasses clinked, and laughter rolled through the room. For a while, I sat quietly, letting the chatter wash over me. I knew what was coming, and I was ready. Then Daniel leaned back in his chair and made a joke. It was sharp and aimed straight at me. He laughed about how I burned toast more often than I grated papers, and added that one day I might learn how to be useful. The table erupted in chuckles, but my stomach tightened. This was his habit, making me small for his family's entertainment. But this time, he had no idea what was waiting for him. I pushed my chair back and stood up. The room went still. Daniel smirked, thinking he had embarrassed me enough to sit down again, but I didn't. My voice came out calm, steady, carrying across the table. I think it's time everyone here knew the truth about Daniel. He froze, his smirk fading into confusion. Patricia's fork clinked against her plate, her eyes narrowing. I reached into my bag and pulled out the folder I had carried for weeks. One by one, I laid the papers on the table, printed messages, hotel receipts, even a transcript of the voicemail. The evidence spread out like a map of betrayal under the glow of the chandelier. Daniel's face drained of color. He stammered something about it being taken out of context. But before he could continue, the sound of the front door slamming made everyone turn. Megan's husband stormed in, red-faced and shaking with rage. He pointed at Daniel, his voice cutting through the room. "It's true. Every word of it. He's been sleeping with my wife." Gasps filled the air. Patricia clutched her chest, and Mark cursed under his breath. The Miller family, who had once sat so smugly in judgment of me, now stared at Daniel as if seeing him for the first time. His mask, the polished image he worked so hard to protect, cracked into pieces right there at his mother's birthday dinner. I didn't shout. I didn't cry. I only looked at him and spoke clearly, so no one could forget. Do you remember the night you made me kneel in front of this family? Do you remember how proud you looked while I apologized for something I didn't do? My voice didn't shake. Now it's your turn. Kneel. Apologize. Not just to me, but to everyone you've lied to. The silence was heavy. Daniel's eyes darted around the table, searching for support. But no one came to his defense. Even Patricia sat frozen, her face pale with shame. The room that once belonged to him now belonged to me, and everyone waited to see what he would do. Daniel sat stiff in his chair, his face pale, sweat forming on his forehead. No one at the table spoke. I could see him searching for words, but his mouth only opened and closed like he was drowning in air. The silence was heavier than shouting, and I let it hang until every eye in that room was fixed on him. Then I leaned forward, my voice steady. Do you remember what you told me that night? He looked confused, but I didn't wait for him to answer. I repeated his own words back to him, word for word. Get on your knees and apologize. Show respect. Admit you were wrong. The sound of his own cruelty echoed in the room. His family shifted in their seats, shocked at the memory they all shared but had chosen to ignore. Daniel's face twisted. That's not the same, he started, but I cut him off. It's exactly the same. Only this time, the evidence is in front of everyone. You lied, you cheated, and you disrespected not just me, but every person at this table. So go on, Daniel. Get on your knees. Apologize. Admit you were wrong. Patricia finally found her voice. Emily, that's enough, she said sharply. We don't need this scene. Families handle things privately. Before I could respond, Rachel spoke up from across the table. Her voice was clear and firm. No, Aunt Patricia. You stayed quiet when he humiliated her. You don't get to stay quiet now just because it makes you uncomfortable. She's right. He owes her, and all of us, an apology. The words hit Patricia hard. She tried to argue, but Rachel's stare stopped her. Around the table, no one else came to Daniel's defense. Even Mark looked away, disgusted. Daniel was alone. His jaw tightened, his fists clenched on the table, but he knew. He could see it in their eyes. He was cornered. Slowly, stiffly, he pushed his chair back. The sound of it scraping against the floor filled the silence. He dropped to his knees, his head bowed, his voice low and broken. I'm sorry, he muttered. I didn't smile. I didn't cry. I only looked down at him, the man who once thought he held all the power. For the first time, he was small. For the first time, he was beneath me. I slipped the engagement ring off my finger and set it on the table in front of him. The tiny click of metal against wood sounded final, like the closing of a door. Without another word, I turned and walked toward the front door. The room stayed silent as I left, but I could feel their eyes on me. I didn't look back. My dignity was mine again, and Daniel's shame belonged to him. I moved into a small apartment a week after the dinner. It wasn't much, just 2 rooms and a balcony that overlooked a row of maple trees, but it felt like freedom. Every box I unpacked, every picture I hung on the wall, felt like a piece of myself coming back. There was no heavy silence waiting for me when I came home, no sharp comments disguised as jokes, no eyes watching for mistakes. The air felt lighter. I could finally breathe. One afternoon, there was a knock at my door. When I opened it, Rachel stood there holding a bottle of sparkling cider and 2 glasses. She hugged me tight before I could say a word. You don't know how much you did for all of us, she said. We sat together on the floor among my half-unpacked boxes, sipping from plastic cups, laughing and talking like old friends. She thanked me for exposing Daniel, for breaking the cycle that no one else had dared to challenge. For the first time in a long while, I felt seen. News about Daniel spread quickly. Megan's husband filed for divorce, and her name became tied to scandal. Daniel's business associates found out about his affair, and contracts slipped away one after another. His image, the one he had polished so carefully, crumbled in weeks. He tried to lean on Patricia, but even she couldn't patch the cracks. People whispered, neighbors turned cold, and the Miller family name was no longer a badge of pride. Patricia avoided me on the rare occasions we crossed paths, her smile gone, her eyes hard. I didn't celebrate his downfall, but I didn't mourn it either. What happened to him was the result of his own choices, the truth finally catching up. I hadn't ruined him, he had done that himself. All I had done was pull back the curtain and let everyone else see what I already knew. At night, in the quiet of my new place, I often thought back to the night he forced me onto the floor in front of his family. The shame I had felt then was heavy, crushing, like it would never leave me. But it had also planted something inside me, a vow that one day I would take back my dignity. And I did. I no longer felt small. I no longer felt like someone who had to apologize for existing. I was stronger, sharper, and freer than I had ever been. My scars reminded me of what I had survived, but they also reminded me that I had chosen not to stay broken. Standing on my balcony one evening, watching the sun dip below the trees, I felt peace. Daniel's voice no longer echoed in my head. His family's judgment no longer weighed on me. I was my own person again. And in that moment, I promised myself one thing with absolute certainty. I would never kneel for anyone again.